Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Stylen, and today I'm going to teach you how to make the video game asset that you're seeing on screen right now from start to finish in about 1 hour. This method that I'm going to show you is great for rapid iteration of static assets, but it will not help you out so much for meshes that need to be animated. We're going to go over how to create a base mesh, sculpting that mesh, retopology by decimating, UV unwrapping, baking, and texturing. Fair warning, this is not a AAA approved workflow because we're going to take a lot of shortcuts in the name of speed, but I think this method works great for tinkerers and indie developers looking to save some time. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. So starting here with Blender's default cube, the first thing we're going to do is hop into the modeling tab, and that will take us into edit mode automatically. We're going to press Z to bring up our shading options, and we're going to go into wireframe. Then we're going to press numpad 1 to bring us into the orthographic front view. And if you double tap A, you will toggle between selecting all your vertices and none of your vertices. So then I'm going to select all of my top vertices, and then I'm going to come out of the orthographic front view so that we can see that I have in fact selected all of them. So then I'm going to press E to extrude, and that will automatically lock it to the Z-axis, but rather than extruding anywhere up, I'm going to press escape now, and that gives us basically double vertices for all of these top 4 vertices. Now, with these 4 double vertices selected, I'm going to press S to scale, and that will give us a 2-dimensional plane coming out perfectly from the top of our box. So that's the beginning of our pedestal. And before I forget, I'm going to quickly move our box up 1 unit. So that's going to be G for grab, then Z to lock us in the Z axis, and then hit 1 to move up 1 unit. The default Blender cube is 2 units in all directions. So, and then just because I don't like when this origin is not where I want it to be, I'm going to come over here in layout object mode and select the object tab and origin to the 3D cursor, so that puts it at the bottom. That's just a nice place for this type of asset to have. It's a good place for our 3D cursor to be. So going back into the modeling view with our 4 top vertices selected, now I'm going to go back into the orthographic front view, and I'm going to press E to extrude, but this time I'm fine with moving up a little bit. So, let your conscience be your guide, but I think right about there looks good for the lip. So if we press Z to bring up our shading options and go into solid, you can see that we've created basically the shape that I said we were going to go for here. So the next part is we want to create the bowl that's coming in the top. What do we have there? So we're going to create the bowl that comes in on the top. So I'm going to do that with a separate object, and there's definitely a million ways you could go about this, but I'm going to see if I can get it done using some Boolean modifiers super quick. So we're going to hide our cube. We're going to, while in object mode, we're going to press Shift A for add. To bring up our add menu, select a new mesh, and we're going to bring in a UV sphere. And now I'm going to go Z to bring up our shading options and change it to wireframe mode. And then with our newly generated sphere selected, I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate and press escape so that we don't move it around. Then I'm going to press S to scale, and I'm going to bring it in so that we have a sphere within our original sphere, and I'm going to scale it in so that it looks about the thickness that I would want the inner part of our bowl to be, if that makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense, just keep watching and it will. So I think right there is okay. So we have now a sphere within our sphere, And I'm going to press Shift and select our other sphere and press Control J to join them into one object. Now I'm going to deselect everything and press Shift A to add a cube. And so I'm going to scale up our cube so that it encompasses our object. Then I'm going to press G for grab and then Z to lock our movement to the Z axis. And I'm going to move it down so that our bowl is beneath the halfway point of our spheres, because I feel that it looks better as a bowl, not to be a perfect circle, but that is entirely up to you. In fact, I'm just showing you the workflow here. You can do whatever you want really with your asset. So I'm going to say right there is about good. And now if we go into solid view, well, no, wireframe, what I want to do is apply a Boolean modifier so that we take only where the cube intersects with our sphere. And if you can visualize what that would do, is that would basically close off, it would cut off the top of this sphere and it would close up the region where they overlap. And if that doesn't make sense, it will in about 2 seconds. So with our sphere selected, I'm going to go to tab and add a Boolean modifier with our cube 001 selected. And rather than difference, I'm going to choose intersect, and I'm going to go ahead and apply that right out of the gate. And when you create a modifier, a Boolean modifier on an object, it does not by default delete the object you were using to Boolean. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that cube because we don't need it anymore. And now if I go into our solid shading, you can see that what we're left with is a very nice bowl. So I'm going to bring back our original cube, and then I'm going to move it up into place. So G for grab, Z to lock it in the Z axis. Actually, I'm going to go into front orthographic view so I can see. So G for grab, Z to lock it into the Z axis, and I want the bowl to be a little bit sunken into our pedestal. And I think about there looks good. So now looking from here, I'm pretty happy with how that looks. Now, right here, we have this overlap of the top of our pedestal object with the inside of our bowl. And I'm sure there's a way that I could take care of that to fix it, but I think I'm just going to fix it with sculpting. And I'm really not too worried about it. So I think, yeah, right there, we'll move into sculpting. So I'm going to press Control S to save our object here. I'm going to go into my folder where I save all my assets. I'm going to call this pedestal R2 because I already have one. And I'm going to save this as pedestal.blend. And we're going to save it. And then what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to increment my save so that I can, because I'm about to make a big change when we start going into sculpting. I like to save a copy, so Control Shift S for save as, and then in pedestal R2 over here you can see it's red. That's showing that we're about to save over our original. And you have two options. You can either press this plus button to increment, or you can press your numpad plus as a hotkey to. Oops, why am I doing this wrong? You can without having your this text field selected, you press numpad 1, it'll automatically add 1 to whatever your save is so that you can save copies of your file. So save as in the pedestal 1, and then what we're going to do is select both of our objects, Control J to join. And once again, I do not like where the origin of this object is, so I'm going to go very quickly into set origin to 3D cursor. And now we have one object. And this is where things get interesting. So in Blender 2.82, I believe, we got a new feature that is the voxel remesher, and this thing is amazing. So what it does is it goes around the volume of your object and it remeshes your object to use quads of whatever size you specify. So here the default is 0.1 meters, and there's options to fix poles and preserve volumes. Truth be told, I'm not sure what fix poles does. I haven't read enough, but so rather than explaining it more, I'm just going to hit remesh and show you. So looking in wireframe view, this is our current model, and if I press remesh, it will change it to be quads going around the volume, like so. And I can already see that this wasn't fine enough for what I want to do. So, but looking back in solid view, you can see what's happened. It has gone around and it has remeshed it to do quads, which is an amazing thing for Blender. So I'm going to Control Z. I'm going to make this voxel size a little smaller so that we can hopefully get, I'm going to shoot for maybe 100,000 triangles, 150,000 triangles, just so we can have some resolution to work with and my computer can handle it. So you're going to have to play with it and see what you can do. So let's go 0. Whoa, that would probably break our computer. 0.01. Let's see what that does. And I pressed it, so I believe it's working on it, and that is pretty good. And I have definitely overstepped because just like I said, I don't know if I double clicked it. But anyways, we have 1,000,000 triangles, which was not what I wanted. Control Z. Okay, back to where we were. Rather than 0.01, let's try 0.05. Let's see where that gets us. Not too bad. Let's go a little smaller than that. 0.03. I think that's good enough for our purposes right here. So with that, this is our base mesh ready for sculpting. So I'm going to switch over to my tablet so that I can start sculpting here. And this is where things are going to start to get very subjective. But, you know, it's an example of the workflow here. You don't have to love how I sculpt this. You can sculpt however you want. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on X and Y symmetry just to save us a little bit of time. And I'm going to hold down Shift to smooth out a few things because when you voxel remesh, it preserves maybe, I bet you, now that I'm thinking about it, I bet you the smooth normals option is what we're looking for to not have this issue here where it artificially creates these planes of quads, but it's not a big deal. So we'll just smooth these out holding Shift, and we'll go back and we'll build up some detail however we like. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn on my dynamic topology. So this isn't supposed to be a introduction to Blender by any means, but very quickly, the remeshing feature gives us quadrilaterals everywhere. If you see, these are all perfect little quads, and that's great for sculpting detail, especially if you have textures that you're using to sculpt. But it's not very good for making changes on the fly. Meaning if we suddenly wanted to grab our snake hook brush and pull this out, you can see these quads are getting very stretched. That's not what we want. So the way we can fix that is by going into dynamic topology and setting that to a resolution that we feel comfortable with. You just have to play around. It depends on your model, obviously. And with relative detail selected, the closer you are to your model, the finer resolution you create. So that is very fine resolution model. This is very not fine resolution. Well, not very, but you get the idea. Now, the main difference is that dynamic topology, rather than using quadrilaterals, creates triangles, which very difficult to see in this view, but I think you can see that these are all little triangles. So I'm going to Control Z all of that nonsense. I'm going to press Z to bring back our shading view and go on to solid, and with that we will start working. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab my scrape brush, and I'm going to bevel these corners here. So if we play with the size a little bit, oh, that is not the right brush. I always do this. I select the fill brush instead of the scrape brush. So with our scrape brush selected, we're going to bevel out these corners. And because we have dynamic topology turned on, you don't want to be very close, otherwise you will get insanely fine detail. So find somewhere that's close enough, but not necessarily going to break your computer with the resolution that you're creating. So with our scrape brush, we can very nicely flatten out these sharp edges. And the reason we're doing that is because the way that these corners look so sharp like that, it's like they're as sharp as a knife, and in real life that just, with this sort of thing, it doesn't happen. You know, you would never get something this sharp. And you don't necessarily have to have a sharp edge here. You could smooth it a little bit, but I am gonna leave it a little sharp because I like that. But it just makes it look a lot more realistic, as I'll zoom out and show. And even when we remeshed, we got a little bit of a bevel here, but we didn't get it here, so we're gonna go in and add it. So quickly, we're just going to use our scrape brush, flatten down these edges a little bit, and that looks pretty good. And then what we're gonna do is do the same thing everywhere. So here, and there we go. Flatten these things out a little bit. Perfect. Now the same for the bottom. We're just gonna do this everywhere because I like the way it looks. And you know, this here, this isn't a math problem. This is completely subjective. If you don't like the way this bevel looks, you don't have to do it. I mean, I assume you're not making a pedestal with a bowl in the top, I assume. You know? Okay, so that is a pretty good roughed in base mesh with our corners beveled out. So the next thing I'm going to do is hop over to my crease brush, and I'm going to make it a little smaller. And what I want to do is, I was thinking to have 2 layers of bricks here, roughly in the center. So I'm going to go into my front orthographic view, nothing too fancy here, and right around the, ooh, that is, you have to be careful when you have dynamic topology enabled that you find a good distance to sculpt from, because if you're too far, you'll ruin the resolution of your model, and it just is not what you're after. So normally a brick pattern is very uniform, so I'm gonna try to the best of my ability, do some artificial symmetry here and maybe count these little squares. So if we call 1, 2, 3, 4 squares, where we're gonna call that a layer of bricks. I think that's okay. So then we're gonna go down here, 1, 2, 3, 4 bricks, and we're going to do our other layer. Very nice. So there we have it. And now we're going to go around the model and do the same thing on all 4 sides, so that we have our layers established. Very nice. And now keep in mind, when you're sculpting, it's good to really move around your model a lot. When you sculpt too long in a certain direction, it sort of ruins your understanding of what you're doing. Like when I'm right here and I'm just sculpting away, the second I turn, I could realize that it's not exactly what I was going for, because when you're sculpting on this, it's a two-dimensional representation of the 3D object that you're trying to create. So without moving, you don't really capture a 3D. You're basically painting. So always be moving around your model. I digress. I tend to ramble while I'm teaching. So just going through, we're trying to establish the layers of our bricks. And that is not too bad. So we have 2 layers of bricks now on our object. That's doing okay. And we now are going to probably turn symmetry off, because what I don't want is to have the same pattern on all 4 sides. That tends to not look too realistic. So sometimes when you have symmetry enabled, it can hurt you a little more than it helps you. It definitely saves time, but it's not always the right choice. So we're trying to have a pseudo random brick pattern here. So maybe we'll have a short one on the corner here, like so. And I'm pretty happy with that. And we'll do a longer one here. And by all means, just sort of, you know, do whatever feels right to you in the moment here. So we're just going to sculpt in some bricks. Maybe we'll do another small one here. Oops, did not mean to press that. So we're just sculpting away. My stylus, if anyone can figure out, well, I can probably figure it out, I'm just lazy, but my stylus has a button that if I press it, for some reason it flips the direction that I am working, and it really bothers me. So let's see, what if we, this is an interesting one. I'm going to pretend that there's just a very large block here, because why not? So yeah. Okay, so we're making progress. We're doing another block here, maybe one here, and you know, don't follow me exactly. I mean, you could if you were just trying to replicate what I'm doing for learning purposes, but you know, this is where you can let your creativity come into play and just play around, figure out what the clay is wanting you to make. So come in here. This will be another big block. Some of these blocks are huge. I'll do one here. Not too particularly important. Do one here. Why not? Come in here. That's a big one. And we'll do one here. And I'm hoping that I'm not squeaking too much, because that is incredibly annoying. It bothers me while I'm working. So there we have our layers of brick established. And I'm going to call that okay for now. I'll probably come back and see if I can crisp up these edges. If you hold the control button for crease, it does the opposite. Instead of pushing in, it pushes out, and it's a nice way to create some sharp edge work. So now I said I was gonna come back for it, but I'm just gonna go ahead and do it real quick. So real quick, just coming in, creasing, coming in and holding control down and creasing. I keep pressing that button. And trying to really get some good separation between these bricks. Like so. Again, making sure we have symmetry disabled for all of this, because that would not be ideal in this scenario for sure. And this is a very subtle effect we're doing here. We're just adding a slight ridge around the perimeter of the brick. Maybe more trouble than it's worth, but who's timing us right now? And we're just drawing lines all around basically. Get lost in this sort of detail, and that is the whole thing done. So zooming out, you can maybe see the ridges a little bit better. So good. And then if you recall, the one thing I said that I'm not a fan of was how the plane intersected with the bowl and left us this flat plane here. I want the bowl to be sunken into the top of the table. I don't want it to be I don't want it to be flat like that. So what we're going to do is, with our X and Y symmetry enabled again, with our clay strips brush, we're going to hold down Control and just dig out a little bit of volume here, smooth it away, and you can see that we are getting back our bowl. And this is we're just going to take care of this with sculpting, and I think that's about good here. I'm just trying to be a little bit more careful to not ruin the edge of our bowl. I'm not worried if it's if I hit it a little bit, because I am the last thing I'm going to do here is really ding up our pedestal, because I like the worn look. I like little pieces to be broken off and whatever. So the first thing I'm going to do before I make my final pass where I apply damage to the object, I'm going to grab our clay strips brush with a smaller size, and I'm going to turn my strength way down, maybe around there, disable symmetry. Sorry about that. And I'm going to maybe a slightly higher strength. And I'm going to go over my bricks and try to make a little bit of texture on them to sort of sell the fact that they're made of stone. So I'm going to alternate between addition without holding Control and holding Control, and just try to rough them up a little bit. And if you see, the effect that had is a little bit of sort of cross hatching, but I need some water real quick. But this is where you could take advantage of using some textures so that this could look a little more realistic, but I'm okay with how this is looking. Maybe I'll make my brush a little bigger and hit it with a very slight smooth, see? And generally that's the look we're going for here. So back to my clay strips, just kind of go over everything back and forth, not smoothing, with a little bit of addition and subtraction. And we will get a semi-believable stone texture. And you know, this is where you could get lost in your detail, and you can add as many little crevices and abrasions as you feel makes sense. But my one piece of advice would be not to do too much in one direction. If you're always going up and down, you're gonna lose the effects. So try to switch things up with how you're moving. And once again, if you were using textures to help you out here, it would go a long way. So just gonna quickly, nothing too fancy here, this is just to show you the workflow of how I generally would approach a model like this. Just go over everything, roughen it up a little bit, because we are not going for a hard surface model look, we're going for a hand sculpted look. So this is where I would normally start to ramble about my thoughts on whatever. But you know, again, definitely the using textures to sculpt here could, you know, it saves a lot of time, and it's basically free detail. I mean, some people have different feelings about it, where, you know, did you really do the work there? But I don't believe in that sort of thing. Like, I mean, obviously there's something to be said. Are you using a free texture? Did you just use Google Images? Did you steal someone's texture? That's a complete, but if you're making your own textures, or you're using free textures, like, that's what they're for. And at the end of the day, the art is the end product, so I will for sure be using textures in the future. I mean, it's like maybe a bad analogy, but some people believe that it's cheating to use IDEs when you're coding, that you should just be using text editors for all of your code, which I think is just insane. So we're almost done here. We just have to take care of these sides, and I am sure that my stylus is squeaking up a storm, and I apologize for that. A little bit here, and back with the subtract, maybe a little bit of a different direction. Yeah, but there's a better analogy for back to the whole not tracing, the whole stencils or whatever textures for your sculpting. It's people have a similar thing about using references for drawing whatever, but you know, when you're sculpting, especially an organic thing, not using references is just insane. Art is reference. If you feel that you're not pulling from a reference, you surely are. Like, when you try to draw an apple from memory, the reference you're using, good or bad, is your internal definition of an apple, which comes from the reference of every apple you've ever seen. So even if you think you're not drawing from a reference, you're just doing it poorly. References are always good. In fact, I mean, before I did this, I looked up a bunch of pictures of pedestals, and I'm not strictly going off a reference now, but this is just playing around, obviously. So we are making good progress here. And yeah, we'll just hit the sides real quick. Nothing crazy, just go over it a little bit. Give it a little bit of personality. And we'll go everywhere, alternating between adding and subtracting. And don't go too crazy on trying to change volume. If you're using clay strips brush, well, I mean, in general, you can use the clay strips brush to go crazy with volume changes. It's a very good brush for that. But if you were, say, trying to dig out a very large crack here, I believe usually, especially for a rocky type object, the scrape brush is a amazing brush to add sort of really deep sort of damage and cracks to your model. It's a very good brush for that. So with that, I'm going to say we're good here. The one thing I want to do before that is with our clay strips brush, I want to add a little bit of a sort of defined, I'm going to turn X and Y symmetry back on, and I want to add a little bit of a ring sort of holding our bowl in place, and then I want to try to define a good separation between the two, because I'm hoping that I can have the bowl and the pedestal be different objects. Not literally, but when you texture, I would like it to appear as if the bowl is sunken into our pedestal. And I'm just going through with the crease brush now, and I'm trying to get a little bit of separation here between the bowl and the pedestal. So zooming out, I am pretty happy with how that looks. Not too bad. And then, yeah, I think so. I'm gonna Control S for save because I have not done that in a moment. But the last thing I want to do is add some more serious damage to this thing to give it a worn look, as if it's centuries old, perhaps, or maybe not. But the way we're going to do that is with our scrape brush, like I said before. So with scrape brush enabled, this is another scenario where you for sure want to have your symmetry turned off. And just to show you, it's very hard to have organic looking damage when you have your symmetry on. Like you see, this does not look like something that would happen naturally. Like to have damage like this, you'd have to be using some weird device to pick up the pedestal, and that would damage the stone, and that's not the look we're going for. So I'm going to Control Z that, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off my symmetry. So the default brush setting for the scrape brush is to sculpt using the area plane, and what that does is it scrapes away based on the normal of the face that you're sculpting. And it's nice for some things, but we get some very interesting behavior if we set this to, instead of sculpting from the area plane, the view plane. So instead of sculpting from the normal of the face that we're sculpting on, it will sculpt based on the direction that we're looking at the model from. So with that, you can make these very deep cuts in your model like that. And I really like the way that looks for just damage on stone. So that one might be a little bit too aggressive, but if we come in here, look at it from a pretty extreme angle, and we just hit it, boom, we have a very big chunk cut out. And then we'll come back with the clay strips brush when we're done, and we'll add a little bit of texture to these planes that we create. But in general, this is how you can create some nice damage to stone structures. So coming here, and we don't want to be too be careful with what I just did. I'm looking too far away from my model, and I really messed up the resolution of all the detail we created. So I'm going to go ahead. You could either up your resolution, or you could just come in a little closer. I'm going to opt for coming in a little closer, and I'm going to take a bite out there. And let's see, maybe we can do one. Probably doesn't make sense to do. I'm wondering if we can just take a bite out of the brick from the face here, like this. I think that looks okay. We'll come back and we'll apply some texture. It'll be all right. And I'm thinking we'll do another something here where we'll come at an angle like so. I'll just take a bite out. It's not bad. And again, we can, maybe I like leaving one corner okay. And this is all subjective. I'm just showing, I'm giving you the tools to create here. And then I think we'll do one more here. How do I feel about that? That looks pretty strange. Maybe if we flatten out one corner, we'll see. Yeah, I'm okay with that. So yeah, we've taken a little bit of material out of this, and I think it's okay. It's a decent, a decent example. So we'll go in with our clay strips brush real quick. We'll zoom in so we can have a little bit of good resolution here. We'll come in with our add and we'll subtract a little bit and we'll rough this up. Because, you know, unless your stone pillar's made of glass, wherever this happens is going to be a pretty rough transition. Stone is rough. Like, this does not look like a natural break. This looks like a saw cut. But if we rough it up a bit, especially like so, that's not too bad. And again, same thing here. This looks not like stone. We'll come in, add a little bit with our clay strips and subtract down randomly, just scribbles, and that is how we can get a decent looking stone texture. And now it's plain. I believe is our last one, unless I missed something. Again, I apologize for the squeaking. If anyone has an idea how to mitigate that, please let me know. Subtract, add a little bit. Here we go. I did not do this. Alternating between adding and subtracting. It's a very simple way to create our stone texture. And going here. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so I think right there we're just going to call it good. That's going to be our model. I'm going to switch away from my drawing tablet back to my keyboard and mouse so that I can finish up the remainder. Not the remainder, but we're going to create our textures. We're going to do our quick and dirty retopology of this object, and we're going to end up trying to have something with maybe 1,000 faces, 2,000 faces that looks exactly the same as this, and we're going to texture it. We're going to try to do this all in about 30 minutes. Okay, so Control S, pretty happy with the way our model looks, and we're going to head over to our layout and we're going to duplicate our object, press escape so that it doesn't move around. I'm going to rename our original object and I'm going to call it high poly. I'm going to select our duplicate and I'm going to call it low poly. And obviously, since I'm trying to finish this in about 30 minutes, so I'm going to decimate over a manual retopology, which the argument here is that this is going to be a static mesh. I'm willing to make a little bit of sacrifice in quality, so, you know, I can either spend a few hours, I can try to retopologize this whole thing by hand, or I can do an automatic retopology and I can probably achieve a very nice result, but save so much time. Animated meshes are a completely different story. If you try to decimate, you end up with very sharp triangles and they cannot be animated. But this pedestal will never move. It is going to sit in my game and it's going to have maybe a fire coming out of the top of it, and it does not have to animate at all. So we're going to try and see if we can achieve a good result using the decimated modifier. So with our low poly object selected, we're going to come over here, add a modifier, and it's going to be a generative modifier, and we're going to select decimate. Right now our face count is at 300,000. We're going to, you can use math to figure this out, which, I don't know, just for the giggles of it, I'll show you. And so I said we had 300,000 faces, right? So if we come here, faces, and current faces, 300,000, desired we want to have about 1000, right? So the ratio that we want is simply the division here. So it's 0.0033333. So if we come into here and we type 0.00333, hopefully this will bring us very close to 1000. So you see that. Now you have to be careful and make sure that your low poly mesh has enough faces to capture the geometry that you created with your sculpt. And you can do this by toggling and seeing what type of agreement you have, and I would say that this is pretty decent agreement right here. But just to be safe, the other thing I like to do is to add one more modifier of a shrink wrap modifier, and you want that to be below your decimate modifier, and our be our high poly. And this should move our vertices in our low poly model very slightly, but it should do something. So from there, we're going to apply from the top down our modifiers, and what we're going to do next is go over to the UV editing tab. We're going to press A to select all, U to smart UV project. We're going to create an island margin. This puts a little bit of separation between UV islands, and then we're going to change our area weight to be 1. This, my understanding is that this will preserve the relative size of the faces of your object to their UV space. So a large face on the object would have a larger space in the UV. If I'm wrong, correct me. So I'm going to press OK. This gives us an automatic unwrap, and we will save that. And there's one step I forgot, but it doesn't change anything. With our low poly selected, we're going to Shift D to duplicate. We're going to rename this to cage, and I'm going to hide our original, and I'm going to open back up our high poly sculpt, select our cage, go into modeling, press Alt S to scale along the normals, and actually I'm going to press Z to enable wireframe mode, and then I'm going to press Alt S to scale in the normals. And what you're looking for is to scale such that your cage fully encompasses your high poly model, and we have done a pretty good job here. So Control S. Now I think it might cause an issue, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it. But with our cage selected, I'm going to come over here into the vertex data under UV maps. I'm going to remove the UV map that we originally created with our low poly. So with our low poly selected, once again, I'm going to hide our cage for now. Actually, one step I tend to forget a lot is that you want to have all of your objects be smooth. So select, you take a sip of my water. So select the low poly model, shade smooth, high poly model, shade smooth, and finally the cage, shade smooth. So save. Now with our low poly model selected, we're going to go over to our texture paint tab. Go ahead and hide our cage and our high poly for now. Press N to bring up your tool shelf. And in the tool tab, we are going to create a new texture of the normal, and we're going to see if we can get it done with 1024. So go ahead and press, actually, we're going to rename this to Unreal's convention T for texture underscore pedestal underscore N for normal, and OK. So if we click this again, it'll open up our normal map. That is exactly what we wanted. And while we're here, we'll create a diffuse texture as well. So T underscore pedestal underscore D for diffuse, and OK. So back to our normal map selected. we're going to, okay, so I'm going to hide our tool shelf, and I'm going to come over here to our filter settings. I'm going to turn on the render filter, and I'm going to disable rendering for our cage, and for the time being I'm going to hide it. We're going to switch into object mode. Definitely for a moment back here, you want to make sure that your normal map is the texture that's showing right here, because otherwise you'll bake to the wrong texture map. So press N, go into object mode. We want to bake from our high poly to our low poly, so make sure that your active object is low poly. We're going to go over to our render properties. We're going to switch out of Eevee. We're going to go into cycles, bake. We want to bake a normal map. Selected the active. We are using a cage. It is our cage object. And with that, we should be ready to bake. So press bake. And if all goes according to plan, we should have a very nice bake of our object. And that looks beautiful. That is a very nice bake. So while we're ready to bake, I'm going to actually go back into texture paint mode. I'm going to select our diffuse and I'm going to go one step ahead and take care of something that we will have to take care of later, and that's to bake our ambient occlusion map. And bear with me, I'm going to bake it onto our diffuse texture, but that's just so that I can copy it and have it for later. So back into object mode with our diffuse texture selected, high poly to low poly, bake instead of normal. We want ambient occlusion, and our settings are already saved. Selected the active, cage, bake. Very nice. So we have a pretty good looking ambient occlusion bake as well. So let's go ahead and over in our UV editor, we'll press Alt S to save, and we will save it on pedestal R2 as T pedestal D. Very nice. Save. And then I'm going to come over here. We'll switch over to our normal map, and again we will Alt S to save, just so that we don't lose our bakes. Save image. Okay, so I'm going to go into my file editor, or my Windows Explorer. I'm going to navigate to the folder that I just saved all that, and here we are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a copy of that diffuse texture that we just created, and I'm going to rename it to AO for ambient occlusion.png, and I'm going to close, not close, I'm just going to move that over. So what we have now, if we go over to our just object mode, and I'm going to save, this is what our object looks like with solid shading, but we have also now a material preview, and you can see we have a very nice little untextured, well, not untextured, we have our normal texture, but right now our diffuse map is our ambient occlusion map, which is a very subtle thing that you can barely see. This has captured, using only 1,000 triangles, very nicely our model, and this would run in any game engine. Well, not any game engine obviously, but it is a very high performance game model that we've just created. But now apologize for my throat. I'm not used to talking this early in the morning. So I'm going to come over to our texture painting tab, and I'm going to turn on our material preview. with just our low poly selected, I'm actually going to paint in some base colors over this ambient occlusion because I copied it, I have it, and we're good. We're almost done here. But really quickly, just for the sake of showing you the workflow, I'm going to make this a little smaller. And, you know, there's a lot of different ways to tackle problems, but I'm going to show you how I go about achieving a decent result pretty quickly. So I'm sort of picturing this not being a flat white object. I kind of like the whole, like if you picture like Roman stone marble, it's sort of that almost ivory color. So we're going to come in maybe a little bit, just a slight tinge of yellow, something like that, and we'll see how that looks. I think that looks okay. The one problem is that our roughness is not very, it's tough to have stone that's shiny because we applied a lot of stone texture that is not super easy to see because we don't have any ambient occlusion helping us out, but we will soon. But when you zoom way in from certain angles, you can see that we have our texture, especially here, for example. You can see that our normal map has captured our roughness. However, I don't want the bowl to be the exact same color, so I'm going to go into orthographic front view, and I'm not amazing at this, but how can we... I'm by no means an expert at texture painting, so I'm just going to do it manually. Maybe if we go slightly blue, but rather dark, less saturated, something like that, a little lighter. Let's see. Maybe even less saturated than that. Yeah, we'll go with that just for the sake of brevity. So we're gonna change our fall off just so it's a little easier with edges. So maybe make our brush a little smaller so it's easier. And we'll come in here and just paint the bowl. Okay, so that is our front view. Let's do our back view. Hide our tool shelf so that we can work. Sorry for the squeaking. And we may have to come back and try to fix some of this overlap there. But we'll do the best we can and make sure our strength is at 100. Okay, not bad. Finish up over here. Now we'll do 7 coming from the top. Make our brush a little bigger because this is all the same color. And make it smaller again. Zoom in, try to get these ridges here. And definitely gonna have to come in and fix those areas that I just painted on accident. And these artifacts that you get here, this is the byproduct of our less than ideal topology. But we'll see if we can smudge those out. And coming in here, cleaning up our edge work. Very nice. Now, okay, so generally, these areas where we have the unfortunate byproduct of our automatic topology, we can sometimes come in and just smudge and fix that. Sometimes it doesn't, and it's just, you know, that's what you get for using this method. But so that's where we are at. We'll see if we can fix some of these, hopefully. It doesn't seem like it. This one for sure is just let's see if we can't. Yeah, there's not much we can do, but you know, looking from out here, this is a very very okay looking texture. So we're gonna Control S to save one more time, and then the last thing I wanted to do before I switch over to Photoshop for our final, the trick up our sleeve to achieve nice looking textures, is that I'm going to just play around and first sample this color, and I'm gonna add just a slight amount of color variation. Especially I want like the deeper greens, but I'm going to turn my strength way down, and I'm going to give us essentially a airbrush. And with a bigger brush around the bottom, I was thinking it would be cool to have some green, as if that's probably not subtle enough, but like this, and then we'll probably come back and smudge this a little bit, and then maybe on the top we can come over, have some nice browns, just a little bit of color variation, you know. And then we'll come back and we'll smudge everything up, we'll smudge everything up, have it look a little better. Let's do maybe one more pass with a slightly more saturated red, maybe? I think that might look interesting. Yeah, that's, who knows what this thing's been through. I think that's okay. And now we'll come with our smudge brush, and we'll just sort of get this all, that was a little aggressive. We'll turn our strength down a bit. The smudge brush is, it works pretty hard on my computer to, when you're going over so many pixels at one time like this, it can be a little taxing on your system. Okay, so with that, I will say we'll call that good. Now, obviously, because of this rather saturated green at the bottom, you would want this asset to sit down in some type of grass or whatever. But let's go ahead and we're done drawing now. We'll switch back over to our mouse and keyboard, and we're going to switch over to Photoshop to do our final pass. That this is what's really going to make this asset pop. So we'll get out of here, go into Photoshop, and this is our original picture. Oh, how far we've come. Anyways, so we're going to bring in, and here is our texture. And now the thing is, so we baked out that ambient occlusion map, but the one thing I like to do is, rather than actually using my game engine to apply my ambient occlusion, is that I like to do it in Photoshop. and just get it all in the diffuse map. So the way that I like to do that is by adding an adjustment to my ambient occlusion, where I will change the brightness and the contrast. I'll bring my brightness way down and I'll bring my contrast way up. So you can see that gets us our very nice deep shadows. I like to create a clipping mask here. And then the trick is to change your ambient occlusion from normal to a different blend mode, such as overlay. And if we do that, now you can see we have, if you do that, we have now a very nice texture for our pedestal. So, and if you see how super quick that was, so we're gonna go ahead and save this so that we have it, so it's sort of a non-destructive thing. You can see that I can easily turn off what we just did. We can have our flat diffuse map if we ever wanted it for some reason. I'm gonna go Control-Shift-S to bring up our save as in Photoshop, save this as a PNG, and I want to overwrite my original diffuse texture because we have a copy of it here in Photoshop. Yes. So now if we come back into Blender and we reload our image, that is our finished asset. So I will come over here and let me stop animating, but this is basically the asset we've created. It's, you know, it's not a AAA asset, but I'm pretty happy with how these come out. So we will save it, and then I think, why not? We'll bring it into Unreal Engine, show it. So let me, I guess we'll export the FBX, then I'll hop into Unreal Engine. So File, Export, FBX. Now, if you're a smarter man than me, you'll create a preset, but I never do. So we're gonna create a subfolder in our Blender subdirectory. We'll call it FBX. We're gonna save this as pedestal, and maybe we'll get rid of that one. So pedestal.fbx, and the path mode will be copy. This will allow us to import our textures into Unreal Engine. We want to do our selected object. Let me just verify that we have our, okay, so we have our object selected. So File, Export, FBX. So in our FBX folder, path mode, copy, batch mode, not necessary, selected objects. Now here, the only thing we want to export is our mesh. We don't need any cameras, lamps, armature, or anything else. Transform, we want to have our forward be -y forward z up. Apply transform, apply unit, that's fine. Geometry smoothing using the face, and we are using a smooth object, so that's all good. Now armature, we don't need anything to do here, nothing to do here, so let us get rid of this one more time and export. So now we have our asset created, and let's not close, let's, just in case we have to come in and make a change. Okay, so here we are. I'm going to go into my art folder, and we'll go into nature arena. We will create our pedestal folder, and I will come in here. Really quick, let's go ahead and open up our arena map. Perfect. Okay, and these are all the assets I've created for my game. So in our arena map, just for whatever purpose, I'm going to stick our pedestal right here. So going back into our pedestal folder, I'm going to import. Why is that so big? So art, 3D, pedestal R2, and FBX, pedestal open. Okay, so import settings, skeletal mesh, it is not. Okay. Import normals. Now, force front x-axis. I do believe we want that. I always seem to have a problem with the direction that my models are facing. I think that's the fix right there. Search option, local, and this is a big one here. When you're making a normal map from Blender, you need to invert the normal maps, at least the way that I bake it. Maybe there's a different way to bake it so that you don't have to do this, but this works for me. So invert the normal map, and then go ahead and import. And then we're going to go ahead and Control Shift S to save everything in the project. And now we have our asset, and we'll bring it right in here. We're obviously, it's not the final location of my asset. If I, what is the button? End. I'm just gonna put it right there for now, and then, no, I lied, I'm going to put it over here, just so that we can have some space to look up to it. And then just for the fun of it, I'm going to come into, I'll copy one of these fires. We will put it right here. Let's make sure that that's relatively centered. And looks like we are good to go. And it's probably going to be a somewhat small fire, but compared to the size of our object here, but it's okay. So I'm going to save all of this, and I'm going to go ahead and close this out, because I would like to open up an actual sized version of my game. So I'm going to start the server with clients. Here we go, connect to my server, specify a name. And here we are. And this is just a random character that I made for my game. And this is our object in the game, with a nice fire coming out of it. And this is basically the same exact fire from the starter content. Anyone can grab this. It's very easy to set up. So if you see, this is oh, we don't have I forgot to generate the collision, so that'll be another video. So here we are. This is our finished asset. Nice. Let's shoot an arrow at it. Oop, missed. Anyways, that is about it for now. And there you have it. I know it was quite a long video, but I hope you're able to learn something from it. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe for more indie game development content. I'll be uploading more tutorials and progress videos related to my own personal game development journey. Thank you for watching.